Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Not too bad. Bit hot.
Great.
Weather's nice, but
Yeah,
yeah. Besides that, keeping cool. How are you?
yeah, not too bad. It's not the weather to be in lockdown though, so it's quite nice that the restrictions are being eased ever so slightly.
It is indeed. I mean, from my perspective, life really hasn't changed so much. I think it's for a lot of people it has, but
Yeah,
I do a lot of remote work anyway, and work from home a lot and work from multiple offices. So for me, it hasn't really changed my life, I guess, as much as others. Um, I'm spending more time at home, that's for sure, which can be seen as a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you look at it.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I know it's affected other people quite a bit, affecting sort of like their mental health and maybe even just sort of bills, electricity bills and things like that from working from home. So be interesting to get your take on that and how you coped and how you've been sort of dealing with it.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's there's a lot to kind of digest, and it kind of really does depend. I've been speaking to a few clients, and it depends whether they've been used to remote working or not. You're finding an awful lot of companies have um, offshore development centres, in which case remote's actually not a bad thing. They've already got all the tools in place, they've all got everything they need. But it's when you've got people who are used to coming into an office and then suddenly they're kind of thrown into the you need to work remote. And that I
Yeah.
think is where the challenge is coming from. Are you kind of finding the same?
Yeah, I think I work with obviously a multitude of clients, all in different sort of stages of their sort of remote adoption. And one of the things that I found is the ones that have embraced it early on have been able to hit the ground running with sort of the whole situation, whereas the ones that have been a little bit reluctant to promote remote working generally have struggled. Things like getting kit out to people, setting up VPNs and things like that. It's just taken a little bit longer to get up and running, and obviously the tools and the software as well. So I mean, I think the people that have embraced it before lockdown are the winners in this. That it's just been a natural progression for them. Um, from my perspective, I think it's the smaller things that's affected people. I think it's just I mean, for me, it's like an air-conditioned office is great,
Yeah.
especially with weather like this. So, having to work from home in your shorts is okay, but some people might not have the facilities to work from home. So, and obviously the distractions and things like that come along with it, with all that as well. So,
Can I just ask Steve that there's been a few videos that have been shared around the internet of people stepping up and going to the toilet and taking their kind of Zoom camera with them and stuff. Don't stand up if you've got shorts on. We don't want that, and we don't want that.
it reminds me of that. You see those films where they keep the mic turned on and they go to the toilet. And I've not done that, thankfully.
Yeah. Have you heard the one with Greg Davis when he was a school teacher? There's a story that he tells on Graham Norton when he was a school teacher, and it's genuinely true. You can just tell the way he's telling the story. It's a bit rude. I won't share it with you now, but do a search on YouTube for
I
Graham.
think I might know it. He's got some right stories. I think one of them was
Yeah.
that he said on "Would I Lie to You" around basically imprisoning one of his students in a cupboard or something. So,
that's a whole different story. Yeah, yeah. That's a
I
whole.
wonder why he's not. I wonder why he's not a teacher anymore.
Yeah. It's funny because he says he's a comedian, but I'm not sure he's a comedian. I think his life is just hilarious. It's not that he's a comedian; it's just that he's got one of those lives. Anyway,
Yeah.
but back to remote working. So how have you found it's worked well? I mean, what's the key to success if you're coming into this whole remote working late? You've not quite got there yet. You've got teams that are working, and probably at this point you've got teams who are working from home because had no choice. You've furloughed a few staff. You still have to have staff working.
Yeah.
How what's the key to success with that? How is it working? And if you're coming to it late and it's not working well for you?
I think so. I'll speak especially from a development perspective. So in terms of a development team, but I'm guessing the same principles apply to other types of teams. But I mean, I found that if everyone's working remote, it's a lot easier than some in the office and some out of the office. Because in terms of, everyone's in the same boat. So there's not conversations that are happening in the corridor at work, in the office, and the people remote aren't being privy to them. Whereas if everyone is remote, it's actually a lot easier. So for the people that haven't done remote working in the past, I think this situation is actually a good introduction. I mean, it's probably something that they probably didn't envisage happening. But I think having everyone working remotely puts everyone in the same boat. So I think it might have been easier for a lot of people to adopt and to adapt to the working conditions.
Yeah. Do you find that if you've got some people in the office that it's easy to forget the remote workers? Even if half the staff are remote these days as opposed to one or two, it was always the challenge if you had one or two people working remotely. It was easy to forget them and they were always playing catch up.
Definitely. And I think, that happens as well with offshore or nearshore teams. But if you have, let's say, one or two working remotely, it is quite easy to forget. Not necessarily forget, but just keep them in the loop from time to time. So I think you have to be conscious of that during sort of impromptu conversations. If you have an impromptu conversation, it's not an arranged meeting. Just have a little think. Would that benefit employee A that's working remote? If so, let's just ping them a message on Slack or Teams or Zoom or whichever tech that people are using nowadays. Just to make sure that they're valued, make sure that they're in the loop, make sure they might be able to add some value and an opinion to what you've talked about. And because it wasn't a planned chat, sometimes people forget about those other people in those situations. Meetings, on the other hand, I'm not sure if you're finding this, is that I find that Zoom meetings, people aren't late for Zoom meetings, whereas in the office, it's quite easy to roll up 5-10 minutes late, and and it's okay. It's acceptable for some reason to be late for meetings in the office, but with Zoom, everyone's dead on the dot, which I've found really amazing in terms of how accurate that is.
But to be fair, it's not like you've got somewhere else to be.
Exactly.
I'm constantly joking with my girlfriend that when she's trying to get herself out of bed to get ready to go to work, I'm constantly joking with her that she should just phone the boss and tell her the train's running late. I mean, the typical excuses for being late aren't there now. It's like, I'm late, I forgot to turn Zoom on. That's just not happening, really, is it?
But doesn't that sort of illustrate that there's less distractions at home? Whereas the case for people not working from home, from a company management perspective, is, we don't want people to work from home because there's too many distractions. There's children running around, dogs barking and stuff like that. Whereas, by definition, if you're not late for meetings, then there's got to be an element of not having distractions stopping you attending those meetings.
I'm not sure that it's not having distractions. I think it's more a case of not having acceptable distractions. Sorry, boss, I was late for the Zoom meeting. I was putting the washing on, and it's not acceptable. But equally, one of the things I've always loved about remote working, and I've worked from home for years, and it's only when I have clients that specifically need me in offices that I go in. What I've always found is when you're in an office, it's okay for the office to come back home, but it's never okay for the home to come into the office. And now that we're all working remotely, you've got that kind of mix now of, hang on, if I'm still doing my job and I'm still getting things done, does it really matter that after I had a meeting at 10 o'clock, I went to the washing machine on, went back, did some work, an hour later went to the washing out, sorted it, and then went back to do work? The work is still getting done. And that for me has always been the value of where remote working and work-life balance comes in.
I have to agree with that. I think there are too many misconceptions of, I guess, people working remotely, of what are they up to, what are they doing, and it's the work-life balance is one thing, but generally studies have shown that people work more productive at home. They tend to work more hours. Whether that's okay or not is a different conversation. But productivity is one thing, but it's also effectiveness, I guess, is the key term. The quality of what you produce is also something that sometimes is immeasurable. So I see it a lot where people move to remote working situations. They try and implement the same processes and managerial sort of techniques that they do in an office, and it just doesn't work. I mean, generally, people working from home need to have some freedom. They need to have, as you say, to do the things around the home that generally you would have people in the office doing. Printer support, your internet's going down, you need to reboot the router, stuff like that. You don't need to have that in the office, and you don't have, I guess, kids off school or dogs running around that need feeding, because there's a situation already handled for that. So I think businesses need to sort of understand that working from home isn't the same. It isn't a 9 to 5. It isn't set hours. But some people might choose to work later and earlier for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I've always taken the view that if you're working from home, I actually don't care when you work. If you've got a deadline for next Tuesday and you work through the night on Monday, you know what? I think you're an idiot, but that's your choice. You got the job done when you needed to get it done. But I think that goes into a much more wider management conversation, and there's still an awful lot of traditional managers out there, and what they want to do is they want to see you hit the office at 9. You're not allowed to leave until 5:30, and that's them managing you. And the reality is that's so out of date now. It's like I can sit in a desk and do nothing. I've been there. I've attended. You're not managing the attendance. You're not managing a to-do list. You're managing the outputs that these people achieve. And if they get the output, then does it really matter whether they put the washing machine on or whether the dog barked halfway through the day and it needed to go for a walk at lunchtime? All of these things suddenly become irrelevant because the output is there, and that's what you should be managing. But it doesn't need a change in mindset and a change in the management thinking of mainly big, large organizations. That actually you're not whipping people to be at a desk for 9 o'clock. You're not forcing them to stay there and giving them a 5-minute break to go and get a glass of water or whatever it is. That's not the idea of management. I suppose
exactly.
It's between management and leadership, to be honest.
Definitely, and I think you do see those in the office. People that will, let's say, take extended cigarette breaks or many cigarette breaks or lots of coffee breaks, or decide to make their own coffee as opposed to using instant coffee and things like that.
Don't diss the coffee.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that a lot of business owners may see that as a similar sort of trait of, why isn't that person working? Why aren't there bums on seats? Why aren't they coding away or doing whatever they need to be doing? I think that mindset is, as you say, so antiquated. And I mean, generally those types of businesses have things like timesheet systems where it's all about how many hours have you done, not what you've been doing in those hours, and what have you produced, and how good is it that, what's the quality like and stuff like that. Because you can sit there and bash away and produce something for 100 hours in a week, but it still could be the wrong thing. It still could be the wrong solution to the problem. So, I'd rather spend, I don't know, a couple of hours up front having a little think about it, then do the work. And it could be that I could approach it slightly differently and end up spending, half the time, but have actually the right solution at the end of it. So how you measure that, you can't, except for the end result. That's obviously
there is ways of measuring what the engineers and the technology teams do, but it needs an organization that actually accommodates it. because one of the problems that organizations have is they have a chief financial officer that is God, and you need to kind of bow down to him, and he wants a timesheet so he knows how he's allocating people. You did 4 hours for that client, or you worked 5 hours in that product, and you did this, and you did how much of that was tech support, and how much of that was development and pushing the product forward, and how much of it was overhead of going to meetings that weren't valuable and stuff like that. And finance teams want all of that data. And to be honest, leaderships and management teams need all of that data to understand what's happening. You can't make a view on a product and whether it's the right product and whether you need to invest in it if actually you don't know that everything the teams are doing is tech debt and you're not developing new features at all. It's like, hang on, we're just paying to support a product that isn't actually that valuable to us. So you do need that. But there's ways of changing the organization structure to give you all of that information. It doesn't involve the engineers filling out a timesheet. It's easy to do. And it's one of those things, it's a mindset thing that the leadership have to move from actually 5 hours here, 15 minutes there, 20 minutes there. I wasted the daily stand-up went from 15 minutes to 45 minutes and it was just a waste of my time. And there's ways of counting all of that stuff and recognizing it, but it doesn't mean putting in timesheets or any of those other stuff. But it's still valuable information.
But weirdly enough, I mean, one of the biggest wastes of time is meetings. And
it depends what you call a meeting.
Well, let's use the generalist term of meeting, as in people getting into a room and talking about a subject. Generally, those meetings are very poorly planned, very poorly ran. No clear objectives, no clear agendas. And the people in those meetings, there could be, 20 people in a room, and only 2 or 3 people it's relevant to. So these meetings are continuing to happen remotely.
Yeah.
But it's now rather than death by meeting, it's death by Zoom. I mean, maybe Zoom will become a common household name like Google in terms of, let's have a Zoom, of this, and it's like we're now having Zooms for the sake of it, and I think that may have been the reason why they've gone from 10 million users to like 220 million users over lockdown. And they're making a big success out of not having registration.
But I don't think you can blame. I don't think.
I'm also seeing.
I was just saying, I don't think you can blame meetings for that. That's poor management, poor organisation. I've worked in organisations before whereby the CEO, and I've instituted this as well, where the CEO said, if there's more than 7 people in the meeting, I'm not attending it. If there's not a clear objective of what we want to get out at the end, I'm not going into the beginning of it. So equally, you can easily call 3 engineers in a room on a whiteboard a meeting. So I think it's important to kind of split out what are overhead meetings, governance. What are the meetings we have to make ourselves work, to make ourselves efficient? And what are the meetings that are genuinely productive of figuring out what product are we getting to the customer? How are we getting it there? What's the technical solution that's fixing that problem? How are we resolving that database integrity issue, or the speed of access and all of those other technical issues? Those for me are not meetings. Those for me are part of the solution. It's driving, and that's what you play engineers for. The fact that they need to be in a meeting room doesn't mean you say they're not being an engineer. It just means that they're ideating the solution or a potential approach to they're going to solve.
Well, what's the difference between an inefficient meeting and putting your washing in the washing machine?
Oh,
from a CFO perspective, is a meeting acceptable time wasting? So this is obviously the discussion of.
I think the challenge with that though is that CFOs don't recognise that meetings are inefficient. You have to have a meeting. The fact that you've got 20 people in a room and you only needed 5, and therefore 15 of them are wasting an hour each, it was a meeting. You had to have meetings. But it's one of those things that you need to be very clear on. What is the overhead and how do you get the overhead down to the bare minimum? With a client of mine in Switzerland, I managed to get the meetings, which included daily stand-ups, planning meetings, retrospective meetings, demo meetings, I managed to get the meeting cycle down to 7% of an engineer's time. And they were still complaining. And it's like 7% of your time, that's awesome. I mean, I've never achieved it in any less time than that. And 7% to make the other 93% efficient. I thought that was awesome, but yeah, they still complain. Engineers are just like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's interesting. And I think that's obviously, stand up to the Scrum methodology in general. There's a lot of ceremonies. There is a lot of these meetings, even if they're like 10, 15-minute stand-ups, they are in people's calendars. So that just having those in there sometimes can be not only a distraction, but an inconvenience, because you have to be at your desk at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you have to be there potentially when you're doing a refinement session or a planning session. And fair enough, some of those things, if you're following that methodology, them's the rules, but again, that's one of the downsides of Scrum, is there are a lot of ceremonies, there is a lot of meetings, and that's
I don't think I'd call it a lot. I think I've not looked at Scrum for a few years now, but isn't there something like 11? There's 11 things you have to do in Scrum.
So you got stand-ups, you got retros, you got planning, you got refinements. I mean, some people take it to the nth degree. Some people
that's 7% of the time, and yeah, you can have a planning session that goes for 4 hours or something like that, which I think is ridiculous. If you need a planning session that's 4 hours, you've not pre-planned it enough. The product manager's not doing his job to organize things well enough to reduce the time of the engineers. So yeah, you can make it much worse. But the alternative waterfall is just insane. And equally, the only way to get around all of that, and I remember when I was working with The Guardian, I went up to one guy and said, why aren't you having a stand-up every day? And he said, because I'm the only one in the team. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, tell yourself what you're doing. But the only way around any of that governance is to be a team of one, because then you don't have to share any or communicate with anyone. And that it limits what you can actually achieve doing that. So I think there's a balance between getting the overhead down as low as it can be, but still being part of a team to produce the volume and quality that a team can produce, as opposed to one individual.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion, actually, because obviously with these agile methodologies or ways of working, project management styles, whatever you want to call them, they do have their pros and cons. And, depending on obviously the type of work that you do, whether you're a service-based business or a product-based business, it may change, whether you're a BAU team or a feature-led team, again, also may change. But I'm not sure many discussions have happened around which ones work well with remote working. So, for example, if you was to employ something like a Kanban style, which has less ceremony, or maybe a lean style, it may actually, thinking about it, may actually be better for people who are remote because of that sort of freedom of time, and sort of, just being a little bit sort of.
I mean,
less.
There's a couple of things in there though. One, have you read? There's a paper by Paul Graham, and it compares managers' schedules with maker schedules, and a maker being an engineer. And it's like management who tend to kind of run the roost and kind of organize things, and therefore they're kind of seen as the leaders. They have a schedule that says, if I need to have a half-hour meeting, then I'll just put it in at 10 o'clock. Because do you know what? I don't want to get in at 9 o'clock. I'll put it at 10 o'clock. I'll have the meeting. Everything's fine. If you're an engineer, you want everything you're doing to be either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. So you've got a good 8 hours to run through, think through the problems and resolve them all. So there's a difference in those schedules that actually is quite fundamental, and most people don't get the difference. And like I say, there's a very good article by Paul Graham on that. I think it's called Manager Schedule v Maker Schedule. But the other one is, it's very well saying we're working remotely and we're going lean. Most organizations can't do lean, even when they're in the office. Lean is difficult. And it's not difficult because there's so many processes and ceremonies to go through. It's difficult because managers have to manage in a different way. You have to trust the engineers are doing the right thing for the business, and they're not actually working on their side hustle, and you're paying them to do that. And it's that whole output v outcome equation again. And if you don't have that right, if organizations are not mature enough, yeah, lean is awesome, but most organizations will fail miserably. They'll become less efficient. They'll do everything else. And I've often said, I think of agile, scrum predominantly. Scrum being a training wheels into becoming lean. And if you've got lean at this point of the time journey and agile here, then most organizations start with agile and then start to free up the reins little by little, and they get to lean as the goal.
Yeah.
That's ultimately the object. But you can't just suddenly say, "Oh, guys, there's a pandemic. We're going remote. Let's do lean." Yeah.
I guess the benefit of being agile in the first place is to be able to adapt to working conditions. So, whether that's the business is changing direction, or competitors having a pressure on you as a business, or half your team just go down with with coronavirus or something, or something like this situation that we're in. Being agile, you should be able to adapt to those conditions quite easily. So, as a self-organizing team, if it no longer works for you doing SA Scrum, you would identify that it's not working well. Yeah. And you go, okay, we're all now working remote. It's a bit of a hassle keep doing all these meetings. Let's look at a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
But you hit the nail on the head on one of the things that you said there, which is trust.
Yeah.
And if you don't trust your employees, then you shouldn't employ them.
Yeah. I agree.
So, and I think
it's one of those really strange things that people always want to put governance processes in. We need to check timesheets. We need to check this because we need our employees to be doing everything we've got. And it's like, actually, if you don't trust them, what you need to do is review your HR policy. You're hiring the wrong people. And that's the fundamental part of it. If you think your people are not working on your behalf, if you think your people are not working and trying to come up with the best, easiest solution to fix the problems that your customers have, then your problem is not an engineering one. Your problem is a recruitment one.
Yeah. Or a leadership one in general. They don't want to work for you, or they don't want to work for the business.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's a good point, because I have been in a position before where you see really talented engineers. They come into an organization, and after 3 months, it's like, boss isn't listening to me. Why should I care? Boss doesn't care. Why should I? So it's not the recruitment process. It's you can easily kill a good engineer with a poor management or a poor management style. Yeah, that's equally. So anyway, let's go back to remote working. We've hit on methodologies. We've hit on.
So you mentioned that article.
Yeah.
As I say, you mentioned that article from Paul Graham. Just sort of talking about other articles or publications. I mean, I have read stuff in the past around remote working. So ones that come to mind is the 37 Signals book. They're called Basecamp now. I think they renamed the business, but they have one called Remote, which obviously, if you've read anything from them guys, they are very opinionated. But they have a remote work first sort of team, I guess. They do have an office, I believe, and people do come into the office, so it's not fully remote. Whereas WordPress is, they are renowned to be a fully remote team. There's a book that Scott Birkin wrote. I think it's a year in my pants or something like that, or a life, my life in a year in my pants or something like that. And I've read that, and that's his journey when he worked for WordPress. So he's Matt Mullingweg sort of approached him saying, "Can you come and manage a team for us?" And he basically said, "I'll come and manage a team if I can write a book about my experience." He went, "Okay." So I think he spent a year or so managing a team on the WordPress.com website. That's what their team was. And he wrote this book. So I recommend anyone reading that. And he shows some really great insights on how people have adapted to that remote work first culture, I think.
There's two or three that have made it work. But to be honest, as organizations, there is only two or three that have made it work at that scale. Because WordPress, what's the other one? And Mozilla are 100% remote as far as I'm aware as well, and they make it work. So there's a few out there that make it work, but they're very few and far between. Having said that, with Facebook and Twitter and Google all saying their employees don't need to come into the office for the rest of this year, maybe they'll go fully remote next year. Who knows?
Possibly. And I think in history, I mean, you've seen other companies like Yahoo. They had a quite a flexible work culture, sort of remote working and things like that. And then I think it was Marissa Mayer came in and basically went, we're stopping all of that, and you all got to come into the office. And obviously there was a big sort of loss of good talent because of that. So that's another side effect. I think IBM were renowned for doing a U-turn on it as well. I think they were fully remote at one point. And then I think 2017-ish, something like that, they basically says we're going to stop it and bring everyone in. Citing the same types of, I guess, things that we've talked about, the trust, what are people working on, being more productive, being more innovative in the office. So there's these preconceptions of what a home environment can bring and what it can't bring.
Yeah.
And I think that remote book by 37 Signals, it tries to, it's well structured in the sense that it tries to squash all of those excuses. It basically goes through each of the excuses that people don't want to have remote working in their organization and say, well, here's a counter argument to each one of those. And it talks about things around commuting, who wants to do a commute?
Yeah,
I think
imagine the rush hour commute if no one was commuting anymore. It would just be like a normal day. There is no rush hour. Transport systems across the world would suddenly go, hang on, these billion-dollar investments that we have to make in upgrading our transport network, actually no one's using it. Let's just chill out. We've got capacity to last for the next 20 years again.
Well, if you're spending, let's say, an hour or even 2 hours in the car each day, I mean, I actually quite like that time. Because I listen to podcasts and things like that, so I actually find it quite a nice section of the day. But some don't. Some, depending on obviously the journey into work, the stop and start in the traffic and things like that, it can be quite miserable. And by the time you get to work, you're a bit drained already because of that commute. So if you can imagine that 2 hours a day can be spent at home being a bit more productive, or a little bit more fresh thinking.
Try the London Underground for an hour with your nose in some guy's sweaty armpit. Commuting's, being in a nice comfy car, that would be heaven.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be on the tube at the moment, that's for sure.
No,
sweaty armpit is the least of your worries.
Yes, exactly. That might kill off coronavirus in its entirety. Yeah, that would be quite useful. Anyway, back to remote working. One of the things I found is when you're working remotely is, as you said earlier on, people can be spending 100 hours a week working the wrong thing. And without the in-office environment whereby you can actually talk to people and see, and I always split communication down into informal communication and formal communication. And I think in the office, you can have much more informal communication, just walking past someone's desk and going, that's not what you're meant to be working on, what's happened? Whereas remotely, all the conversations have to be way more formal. You have to set up even having a virtual coffee with someone, so it becomes more formal in itself. But when you're going away from that informal communication, don't you think there's a need from a leadership point of view to be way more clear to everyone in your organization, almost on a one-to-one basis, of making sure they are very clear of what the organization is trying to do, the purpose of the organization, the strategy of where they're trying to get to, and how that person is included into that strategy, so that they can make day-to-day decisions on, actually, rather than doing that, I need to be doing this because this is going to help my organization get to where it needs to get to.
So I think that needs to happen regardless of where they're working. So if they're working in the office or remote, I don't think it matters. I think I've seen companies that haven't communicated their company vision or their product vision to the employees or the wider team, and they've worked on the wrong thing in the office.
Yeah.
But they don't know it's the wrong thing. And even the managers of those teams don't know it's the wrong thing because they've never really sat back and thought about what these visions are. So regardless of whether you're working in the office or remotely, I think that still needs to be in place. I think the big thing for me is that chit chat, that what they call the water cooler sort of scenario, or the corridor conversations, that can be compensated for. Having sort of like general Slack channels, for example, where people can have general chit chat of the latest Game of Thrones episode, or what's happening in the world, maybe some news that comes in, and it's a little bit more of a channel that isn't work related per se. And that, I think that has to happen. I mean, again, it can't be seen as time wasting. It has to be seen as team building. Has to be seen as building a morale and a togetherness. Because as the team separates and works remotely, as a manager, you have to try and bring them back together by encouraging those types of conversations, and because we can't all just go down the pub. You know what I mean? And that's and if you're not working in a team, then you're not working for the team. You're working for yourself or for the larger business, and that's when I think it's becomes a little bit more, I wouldn't say acceptable, but common, that people then maybe be a bit more slack, and probably don't do it as much as they probably could have done, or be as productive as they could have done, because they think, well, I don't feel part of a team. Whereas if your team has X amount to deliver, you don't want to, I guess, affect your friend, your fellow team member, because they have to pick up your slack. So bringing that togetherness is important, and those types of.
So you mentioned earlier on about mental health. I think that plays entirely into mental health, not just the team spirit, but actually having a team that's a self-managing, self-healing team to go through agile issues or go through the team building spirit and stuff. How are you finding that people are handling mental health? Because it's quite an unusual situation we find ourselves in, and I'm quite sure the psychologists will be having hundreds of millions of books issued in the coming 6 and 12 months about how it's affected the whole state of mental health. So
I think from my perspective, I'm actually I believe I'm quite strong-willed and mentally strong-minded, and it's quite easy for me to forget what people may be going through, because it's not affecting me personally. I have to sort of take a step back and put, a bit like user experience, I guess, is see through other people's eyes. And what I found is, people that have children at home, rather than at school, has a big impact on their mental health, because they have these additional stresses and struggles that cause anxiety around having to tutor their children. But I've also seen the other side of the scale, where people are living alone, and these people are healthy, in their mid-20s or early 30s, and they rely on that social engagement. They rely on coming into work and speaking to people, because when they go home, they're on their own. So for them, they're on their own more, because they probably go to the gym generally and exercise and get social interaction there, or go out to pubs and restaurants. But when you can't do any of that, you're at home, and you're at home alone. Not Macaulay Culkin, but
I have a friend. I used to work with him at News Corp, and he's living alone at the moment. He normally has a flatmate, but he's living home alone at the moment. And we're friends on Facebook. And I think at the end of all of this, I'm going to go back through his entire Facebook channel. You can just see the optimism. Man, a night alone, chill out, a glass of wine, everything's great. To day 100 of lockdown, and it's a kind of crappy microwave meal, and it's just like, you can see mentally what's kind of, it'll be quite fascinating to kind of just go through.
He's probably started off with all the great Netflix shows, and now he's
absolutely
the bottom of the barrel stuff.
Absolutely, So we try and have calls every week just to kind of keep him going and keep his spirits up and stuff. But you can tell it's having an impact on people just living on their own.
I mean, it is quite important. So what I tend to do is, at the moment I'm using Zoom quite a bit, but it doesn't really matter what the tool is. to keep in regular contact. As long as you're not there being a distraction or interrupting sort of productivity and things like that, you do need to have you're not checking in on people. You're just communicating with people, making sure they're okay, keeping people in the loop on things that are happening, because it is quite easy to be sort of sitting there.
So,
I mean, I did a development job a while back, and I did it for 7 months remotely, and I literally rolled out of bed, worked on the computer for like probably 10 hours, and then pretty much rolled back into bed. And it was, I felt quite isolated, even though sort of I've got family members and things like that around me. I felt that I was spending far too much time in front of a screen, and my day wasn't broken up, you know, as it is, because I don't smoke and I don't drink coffee. So for me, it was just food breaks and toilet breaks, really. But most of it was sitting there in front of a screen, and I felt a bit imprisoned, weirdly enough. And it was a weird feeling that I'd never felt before. But I did feel a bit like, like I can imagine being in prison, you know, to stare at the walls a lot, you know, same four walls every day, same screen every day. And I think I put it down to, because I was actually doing a developer role there as opposed to a management role, which I tend to do. Just being not in communication with people that regularly. It was a stand up in the morning, and that was it. And I spent all day coding, and then the next day stand up again, and it was like Groundhog Day. It really was. And there was no variety in the day. The day wasn't broken up. The days were quite long and quite tiring. So, you know, I felt at times not thinking the problem through sometimes, and just going through the motions.
Yeah.
So we've got to be careful that doesn't happen to the team, you know, and to the members of the team. So
I remember joking a few years ago that because I'm self-employed, I was organizing my Christmas dinner, and it was a table for one. It can be quite isolating, working on your own, let alone working on your own in remote lockdown. Yeah. One last thing then from me, as we start to come out of lockdown, and people start to go back to offices, and obviously there's social distancing within the offices. How do you look after your team when you're getting them back into an office?
So I've started going back into the office with one of my clients, and they have already started sort of introducing it slowly. So I think that's quite a good thing. So I've advised on a number of areas here. So we've started off with sort of the management team. So the management team have started coming in, and there are hand sanitizers. There's chairs that have been sort of crossed off, so you can't sit close to each other. There's markings on the floor. There's rules around toilets and kitchens. I think the kitchens are closed, but the toilets are like one per person, depending on the size, sometimes two. And there's like a cone system that you put the cone in front of the door if you're in there, so people can't walk in. So there's things like that. So a lot of businesses, I believe, have gone to this level of precaution. And it's an important thing to know. I mentioned something on LinkedIn the other day because I saw a company putting hand sanitizers all around the place. But hand sanitizers are antibacterial, they're not antiviral. So they could lead into a false sense of security for a lot of employees. So it is important that those hand sanitizers are there, just general hygiene, but they're not a replacement for washing your hands regularly. And I think that's a key thing. The business has also allocated personal mice and keyboards to people what you put in your lockers and things like that. So, you know, you're not transferring hardware. And there's a week in and a week off. So it gives at the end of each cycle. So 50% of the team is likely to come in for 1 week, and then there'll be like a spring clean of the desk and things like that. And then those will work from home, and then the next 50% will come in the following week. And as those sort of distances gets eased. I mean, they've just announced it going down to 1 meter, but the client I'm working with, they're still committing to the 2 meter rule.
Yeah.
just from a safety perspective. But there are, and we are sort of trying to prioritize people that want to come into the office. Yeah, people that are struggling from home, maybe don't have the right setup, don't have a lot of distractions or struggling with their mental health, to come into the office first. Whereas the people that are struggling, I say, with childcare, they can continue to work from home.
Yeah.
So I think we're doing quite a good balance there, easing people back into it, but slowly. And as we've sort of drip fed people in, we can identify any problems that may occur with that social distancing, and then change accordingly.
Cool. Okay, nice. Well,
Yeah,
it was great to chat.
let's do it again.
Maybe do it next week. See how things go.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve.
Cool.
Great to chat.
Take care of yourself. See you, Jim.
See ya. Bye bye.